Bottom Line, coming up this Tuesday. Journalists and their trade. What are the hazards of social and political reporting for journalists? Punching bags? A bird's eye view of recent socio-political events, from ACC settlement agreements to presidential declaration on rape and other forms of sexual harassment. The makeup of parliament. Position of the main opposition party not to subject any of their party faithfuls to the ongoing commissions of inquiry. And does the return of local football bring a sigh of relief or grief? All these and more. Joseph Egbenda Kapua seeks the perspective of former president of journalists, current BBC correspondent and grounded expert on socio-political events, Umaru Fofana, who will offer you an amazing cocktail of in-depth views, comments and analysis on Bottom Line this Tuesday at 7 p.m. on SLBC television and our social media platforms. It's Bottom Line on SLBC, the official voice of the people of Sierra Leone. It's Bottom Line, coming up this Tuesday. Journalists and their trade. What are the hazards of social and political reporting for journalists?
Hello and welcome to Bottom Line, a public enlightenment campaign talk show on socio-political events across the country. Now, as we all know, or better still, as we all know, news and views sweep across the country with all the haste they need to fill the appetite of news wanting public. Just that digestion is sometimes slow and difficult, with all the usual ambiguities and loose ends. And that's why it's utterly necessary to dissect them and make analysis of some of the major stories making the news. But how are these stories covered? And what do newsmen face in the process? Well, my guest tonight is broadcast journalist, well actually print and broadcast journalist, BBC correspondent, and the CEO of the Free Media Group company, Umaru Fofana. Welcome to Bottom Line.
Thank you very much, Joseph.
You can also be part of the program by sending your text messages to the number 030-022-639. 030-022-639. You can also join us live on Facebook at SLBC TV channel 31 and on YouTube at SLBC TV Live. This is Bottom Line. My name is Joseph Egbenda Kapua. It's nearly a year since President Julius Maada Bio assumed office. You extensively covered the events before, during, and even after the elections. Now, how was it like for you personally and probably for journalists generally?
It was tough, Joseph. I mean, the stakes were pretty high. I've covered so many elections around the world, and this one was one of those very keenly contested ones. The most keenly contested probably since the restoration of democracy in the 1990s. So clearly, the stakes were very, very high, and it was sometimes enveloped in the tension, the passion, and sometimes the utterly unnecessaries. You know, but I think we survived it all, and then we got what we got. I had always looked forward to a country which not many Syrians know about in terms of democracy in sub-region, and that country is Benin. And the reason I always spoke about Benin, you know, even when I give talks at various fora, was that Benin had this not very common pride of being a country that changed governments almost back to back, when you had President Matthew Keroku as the president, and then his prime minister Nicéphore Soglo resigned and contested against him, and he defeated the president. And President Matthew Keroku went and returned after 4 years, and he defeated Nicéphore Soglo. It spoke a lot about the stability of democracy in the country, and it is something which our last elections reminded me of, that yes, we can change our governments as and when we deem fit without you know, untoward events, you know, albeit so many things yet to get our democracy right.
Now, the people of Sierra Leone have given a new mandate to the SLPP. Sampling the pattern of voting, what political dynamics, if you like, caused the preference of the SLPP to that of the All People's Congress, the governing party then, from your personal observation, considering our political dynamics?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, the point about our country's democracy, and I don't think whether this is something which the political parties themselves have really come to terms with, but we have three bulks of people's voting patterns, in the sense that Our politics, like it or hate it, admit it or deny it, is largely based on ethnic, it's an ethnic kind of thing, in the sense that you have this bulk of voters in the Northwest that would vote for one particular, mostly or are more likely to vote for a particular political party, and then you have this other block that will vote for another political party, and then you have a crucial block in between, which sometimes people often ignore, but it's a very crucial block of voters. And that block will tell you that we are not satisfied with A, B, C, D, and E. They want people over the cracks. They will say things the way they are. And the earlier any government of Sierra Leone realizes the significance of that group, the better for their political survival. And I think that group just, called the balance of power.
And maybe you want to say this again. What group particularly are we talking about insofar as that polity was concerned?
Well, in the case of Freetown, it's a potpourri. You've got virtually every shade of opinion in Freetown. It's a barometer throughout the country. Every ethnic group is represented in Sierra Leone, but people are more educated here, for more reasons than one. And among those educated people, you have some that are not dogmatic followers of certain political shades and opinions. Even if you can go back to the point that, well, in the case of the loss of the APC, there are other dynamics. Namely, people said the anger that the people of Kono felt at two key issues, the Sam Sumana issue and the Emerson Lamina issue. Those were rallying points. Sam Sumana was sacked by the president, Emerson Lamina was suspended and virtually sacked because it was never reinstated. So that angered the people of Kono. And then you had this new party coming up, the NGC. But if you look at the NGC keenly, NGC did not play that power balance in the runoff because they had won Cambia, and when it was runoff, Cambia went back to the APC, if you look at the figures. So I think largely it had to do with that percentage of people.
Some did not appear angry. Why were the people?
Sam Sumana is mostly poker-faced. He's someone, if you've come close to him, he hardly shows his emotions externally. So that when he does, you have to know that it's really gone, to a very high level. So he didn't show it, but the way he behaved and the way he sometimes spoke about it showed that he really was very angry. I remember interviewing him after the Supreme Court's decision, and he was very angry in that interview. And I'm sure that's something which lived with him for a very long time.
I just spoke about the NGC, and I think the emergence of that new political party, the NGC, which leaders largely actually came from the SNPP, or if you think about Dr. Kande Yunkala and other players, there are Jacobas and yes, the new political party, but the major players, we are from the then opposition SNPP. But it appeared, with that party to threaten the chances of the SNPP. Yet the party, say for some parts in Cambia, failed to make that significant impact, at the polls. Is Sierra Leone ready for a new political party, do you think?
It's a tough fight, but just quickly on the issue of the NGC. On the face of it, the NGC, people believe, hurt the SLPP more than it did the APC.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I think it's hurt the APC more than it did the SLPP. If there was no NGC, APC would have led on the first ballot. They would not have won the 55% threshold, but they would have won on the first ballot because they would have won Cambia. And Cambia would have given them, when you consider how close the first round was, Cambia would have given them the edge over the SLPP on first ballot. And people's proclivity towards voting for a certain candidate at the runoff is largely determined by how the candidate fared on the first ballot. When Ernest Kroma led in 2007 on the first ballot, the chances were that he would win on the runoff because they say, there's this old saying that failure is an orphan, success has many parents. So many people really went towards voting for him on the runoff because he had won on the first ballot. So probably, this is not scientific, but probably, if there was no NGC and Dr. Samora Kamara had led on the first ballot, maybe he would have run the runoff, which he would have done. He would have won on the first ballot because Cambia would have voted for him, because Cambia voted massively for him on during the runoff. Now, in terms of having a third party in Sierra Leone, we've tried it. It can be argued that Khalifa Smart won the elections in 1996. But not every Sierra Leonean can be Khalifa Smart at the time. This was a man whom I'm sure when you and I were growing up, they likened to a genius. I remember some of these very untruthful things being said that Khalifa Smart, the white people, the Europeans had said that I mean, when he died, they were going to ask for his head. That was his genius, as emphasized by so many people. So when he came, that was a third party that arguably won an election in Sierra Leone. So I would say that, yes, there could come a time, if the two main political parties don't behave themselves well, when Sierra Leoneans would lead an evolutionary change, and they would just look for an individual that they feel that shares their views and aspirations, and they would convince their relatives, and particularly so because people are becoming increasingly more educated. You know, if you give yourself another few years, less than a generation, the thinking faculty of a lot of voters would change. And when they speak about people being uneducated as a result, not making good political decisions, it's not just because they're uneducated, so therefore they're voting the way they're voting. It's because the few that are educated are hoodwinking these people into believing what they believe. If somebody well-educated went to a village and said to the people that they must vote for this, and otherwise danger was going to happen, the chances would be that they would follow them because the person talking to them was educated and they were not. So the more people become educated, the more they hold their leaders accountable, and the more they make informed decisions when it comes to elections.
Do you see that time soon?
I won't rule anything out, to be honest. This is the age of technology. My mother, who never went to school, discusses issues with me now because she listens to audios on WhatsApp. There is a danger that fake news comes alongside that. But the point is, information gets to reach people now much faster than a decade or so ago. So I don't rule anything out. Consciousness is coming, which is why the earlier our political leaders sit up and treat us with honesty and fairness and justice, the better for the country, but the better for their own political survival as well.
Now, our parliament now comprises, I think, about 4 political parties. 2 very new and 2, if you like, very old. Does this add color to our political system generally, or do they make it colorless, if you like?
In a way, it does. I mean, one of the best things to happen to our parliament is the advent of Kanda Yumkela being in the House. That's an absolute colorful presence in the House. Sometimes when there's debate in parliament and then Kanda Yumkela gets up or stands up to talk, you sense the deafening quietness. And I think it's, for many MPs, it's a learning process when they listen to him. You know, so I think that's one good thing that happened to our parliament. The advent of also the C4C MPs. Now, but in terms of whether or not the presence of these MPs has profoundly changed the behavior of our MPs, I cannot vouch for. Because whilst Kanda Yumkela may be speaking and behaving from a very independent point of view, I can't say the same for the other NGC MPs. Invariably, I can't say the same for the C4C MPs, whether or not they are behaving and talking independently, thinking Sierra Leone, probably thinking Kono, which is the reason that they are there. You know, so it is still possible that some of them are doing some political horse trading. So in terms of color, yes, I'll talk about the issue of Kande. In terms of adding to votes or subtracting from votes, the jury is still out on that.
Okay, now talking about the behavior, I can't say competence or otherwise of some of these people in terms of advocating for their people, you would also realize that generally the MPs appear to guard their political policies, their political position in parliament. We have seen them trading blows, we've seen them bickering and joking for political power, if you like, for positions as the case may be. How do we change the narrative, do you think?
There is no parliament in the world that is without chaos. I mean, even if the reasons for such chaos would vary. Some of the chaotic scenes I've witnessed in our current parliament could easily have been avoided. Not least the most recent one, and I'm speaking very personally here. It is just impossible for you to determine a 2/3 vote by acclamation. It is just not possible. I mean, sometimes you can if the voting is really absolutely overwhelming. Let's say there are only 2 or 3 dissenting voices. And then if you say aye, the ayes would obviously drown out the nays because it would just be a handful. But when you have that kind of close contest of virtually 50-50, probably more on either side, on which side I'm not sure, you've got to do what I think is the needful, namely let's vote by ballot. That's the only way you can clearly determine that 2/3 have voted either in support of a decision or against it. Doing it otherwise is bound to bring about what I consider unnecessary chaos. You can also argue the same when the anti-corruption boss was being confirmed in Parliament. That's something which, again, the chaos that beset that could have been easily avoided. So whereas I'm not surprised when parliamentarians get up and become a bit, rowdy and all of that, I feel that sometimes it's unnecessary, the thing that leads to such chaotic behaviors.
Yes, but then the point at issue, we're talking about adults, we're talking about representatives, the people who say radio, who are upset because some of these debates are covered live. You have people, you have kids at home, watching the programs, and like I said, sometimes you really see the shoving, you really see, the pushing, you really see apparently like even the blows. How do we change it? That is the point at issue. Is there any way, or do we let the anger, by the way decisions are reached, do we let that affect the way we especially when we're on set?
Our politics is largely broken. And I have spoken about this many times. The political parties lack internal democracy. And because they lack internal democracy, they don't get the best feet forward. They don't get the best candidates being put forward by their parties. And I can assure that in some constituencies, those who did not get the symbol, I'm using that for want of a better way of saying it, because I wouldn't say primaries, because there were no primaries in some instances. But those who didn't get given the symbol were the better candidates. And some of them were ruled out, not based on any legal compulsion. I know about the much talked about 2SIM and all the rest of it that disqualified some. But even some of those who did not get awarded the symbol were a lot better than those who did get the symbols awarded to them. So if there is internal democracy within our political parties, which will make sure that people vote to determine who leads them or who becomes their candidates, very honestly and transparently, then we would have probably the best guys in Parliament. But as it is now, it depends on who is able to win their way into the hearts and minds of the leadership of the political parties. That is what largely determines who becomes the parliamentary candidates in a constituency. So consequently, you don't get the best. But there are some very good MPs doing that. I like the guy called Daniel Koroma of the APC. I've been in Parliament on a couple of occasions. It's been really very impressive. He's been dispassionate. I was there when we were discussing the issue of the I think on Valentine's Day, something to do with women empowerment. This is a Northerner who was calling the Northerners out, saying that your reprehensible approach towards disqualifying women from running for paramount chieftain's election is outdated. And I thought it takes a man with honor, with conviction, to speak out that way, because it could cost him his seat. It's a very conservative area, the North, not least when it comes to dealing with chieftain's elections. But he was honest enough to speak his mind. And I was there again more recently, and I think it's a very good debater. So is Kano Yumkela. There's a lady called Veronica Kadisisi, among others. These are very good parliamentarians who've been really very passionate in debating issues in the House. But there are some there that probably have no business being in the House. They are there because of the way our politics is crafted.
Now, the president recently declared rape and sexual penetration a national emergency, suggesting life imprisonment on conviction. You were caught up in the hoo-ha in Parliament, during the debate on the said declaration. What sense can you draw from that euphoria?
One thing that I got clearly was from the debates, there was not a single parliamentarian who said that rape or sexual offense was not a serious concern. They all agreed that it was a very serious concern. And just to digress a little bit, even if related, I'm doing a BBC television report, and I've been to Don Bosco today, and I've been to the Aberdeen Women's Clinic today, and I am really very emotionally disturbed. At the Don Bosco Clinic, I met Don Bosco Safe Home. I met a 13-year-old girl who is a breastfeeding mother, and the baby is a product of a rape, allegedly by her own father. And this happened in Pujahun. Pujahun has for many years been this place that ought to have been given attention many, many years ago. For many years, it was the place for teenage pregnancy, but I don't think any action was taken by the central government to deal with it. Before Pujahun, it was Kwenedogu, and it went on for many years. I did a story in Kwenedogu many years ago, and 10% of all the girls in junior secondary school at KSS in 1 year got pregnant. That ought to have been a serious alarm that should have woken up the government to sit up and do the needful in trying to salvage our girls. our future leaders. Now, the issue about what happened in Parliament having to do with this, like I said, nobody disagreed with the fact that it is a serious issue, rape, particularly of minors. The argument was whether or not it should have been declared a state of emergency. And my understanding was, I think a parliamentarian from the APC side made this argument that, look, you would need an emergency if you need a specific time to deal once and for all with a particular issue. For example, if there's a meningitis outbreak that threatens the peace and stability of Sierra Leone, you can let's declare a state of emergency and deal with meningitis within 3 months.
In this instance, it's rape.
In this instance, it's rape. You're not going to be able to deal with it, all of it, together in 3 months.
The period can be enlarged.
So the question is, for how long can that continue? For as long as rape continues, do you continue extending state of emergency? If I was President Bio, the day I declared a state of emergency, I would have had a prepared, amended version of our Sexual Offences Act, which I would have displayed to the nation on that day. That I'm declaring a limited state of emergency for 1 month or for 3 months, within which period I'm giving a certificate of urgency to this bill, this amendment to the bill, and I'm craving Parliament to speedily amend the laws so we can deal with this menace. But it looked open-ended when it declared a state of emergency, and we were not filled in as to how long it was going to be for. So that informed the uncertainty on the part of the APC as to whether it will be misused or abused. I don't share their sentiment that it will be used as a political tool. I can't see any evidence of that whatsoever, but I can understand with their reasoning that it's open-ended and there ought to have been a window.
Is it not about giving it a chance altogether? If there's this declaration, and probably for a period that you're suggesting, also, where that is exhausted, it can be enlarged, as the case may be. So why do we not allow the process itself and see what happens? Why the case? Yes, a good number of people, like you're suggesting, are in for some amendments to the Sexual Offences Act, which probably because the law is still existing, and so. But then again, this is a presidential declaration, and they are saying maybe this is specific, and not so much that the sense that they are drawing from it all. And because it's public emergency, that the country itself is so much, in a state of public emergency, such that. But this is only limited and probably related to rape and sexual penetration of minors.
Well, it's all a conjecture, because the reality is, there was no definitive time given as to how long it was going to last for. When Ebola was declared a public health emergency, there was a 1 year specific time, with the tendency of being extended if there was a need for it. There was a need for it, and then it was extended once. When the second extension expired, there was no extension, even though it was left quiet. Again, I said to myself that the government ought to have announced that it had ended because Ebola had ended. But it expired by effluxion because the 1 year period ended and there was no extension. So it expired naturally. Now, there was no time frame given in this case. Like I say, like I said, I'm surprised that we're only waking up to this reality now. And I saw the girl, the very poor girl, whose rape triggered this rallying call by Sierra Leoneans to deal with this menace in our society. But I feel that a specific time frame given to it would have saved us all this hoo-ha, as to who is right and who is wrong, what to do, who has some ulterior motive to do what. Like I say, I don't see any ulterior motive, but I honestly feel that we could have dealt with this a lot better.
Now, you are also a strong campaigner against corruption. I've read many posts from you about the ills of corruption, and a lot of people have been indicted by the ACC and standing trial in court, while settlement agreements have also been reached with others. According to the ACC commissioner, they have now recovered to date over 11 billion loans from these corrupt officials, if you like. Any comments on this approach insofar as settlement agreements are in?
Yes, the amount of money recovered is a lot higher than before, but it's not new. It was something which was done by previous heads of the Anti-Corruption Commission. They tried to go for out-of-court settlement. Some of those settlements were very reprehensible, and I still can't come to terms with the settlements out of court over the Nassit Ferry case. Some guys ought to have been charged and jailed.
That was out of court.
It was out of court.
Even before they get to court.
Exactly, that was out of court settlements.
Yeah.
Some of them ought to have been charged and jailed upon conviction, because I thought that was as if some people took us for granted and they had the effrontery to do what they did, buying second-hand, largely unusable things and imposing them on us. And what happened at the SLRSA, then called SLR something, I'm not sure what the name was akin to what happened in NASIT. Because when Sarah Bendo was there, she was convicted at the High Court, even if she was later on, got off the hook at the appeals court, for having purchased trucks that were old, second-hand, and not worthy of anything. That was exactly what happened in the case of the NASIT ferry. So my question was, why didn't you charge those guys as well? It was for more or less the same thing. And in fact, the volume of money involved in the case of the ferry was much higher than in the case of the trucks. But anyway, that's for another day. So I think it's a very interesting idea when you consider the cumbersome process that trials take in our courts, and when some people who clearly are guilty but because of technicality can't be found guilty by the courts, and then they're let off the hook. You can argue that it's good for us to have the money instead of spending money on prosecuting them and then losing the case in the end. But I think they have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. I mean, if somebody, for example, is guilty of tax evasion at that level, I don't think you go out of court settlement with them, unless they are going to pay compensation. They can't just pay the tax that they evaded at that level. That's my very personal opinion. So you have to make it very, very costly. So somebody else who is in the same habits will advise themselves that, wait, we better behave ourselves, otherwise we're going to be in the same category. Generally, you get the feeling that there's a huge push in the fight against corruption, but I'm very cautious in terms of rating people at this stage. When President Nkrumah took over in 2007, he did some of the boldest things in the fight against corruption. He amended Anti-Corruption Act, which widened the section, the corruption offenses to include things like unexplained wealth, things like illicit enrichment, conflict of interest, and the obligatory declaration of public assets, albeit confidentially only. So those are very good things. So it is probably hasty to give the fight against corruption a very clean bill of health at this stage, just a little under a year of President Bio's administration. But it's a very good start. We can only hope that it will continue and it will be intensified in the best interest of this country. People don't have drugs in hospitals because of corruption. People don't have good salaries because of corruption. People are living in squalor because of corruption. If all of those leakages, and sometimes the leakages are not trickling down, they are really oozing out, massive. If they are really controlled, I can assure you that we can't be living in the kind of squalid state we find ourselves in.
Now, still talking about the settlement agreements, do you think they are a deterrent to prevent corruption?
There are many ways to fight corruption.
Are they just some bandage to a wound?
No, you can call them a band-aid. I mean, the point is, you can't use one brush to paint it all. Yeah. It may be a good thing in certain instances, it may not so be in some other instances. I think they have to be weighed on a case-by-case basis. Not just because somebody stole money and they walk up to you and said that they wanted to settle it out of court and they wanted to pay back the money, you would say, okay, come. No. And I suspect that the Anti-Corruption Commissioner is not using that single approach. My reading is he is weighing them. Some he is not accepting just recovery, and some he is accepting.
But he is saying they have more matters in court actually than those that they are selling.
Yeah.
But then he's also moving away from the sensational aspect of fighting corruption. He said that himself on his program. About news about indicting people, news about prosecuting people, and they are largely focusing on prevention as well. What's your take on that?
In the fight against corruption, you pay attention as much to prosecution as you do to prevention. Now, prosecution in itself can serve as a preventive mechanism. If you're in public office and if somebody is being prosecuted, that is a way of telling you to prevent yourself from being corrupted, or from being prosecuted. So therefore, it can be preventative. But I believe in this idea of, I think it was Joseph Kamara, somebody before him, also, they established these, what they call integrity clubs. I think it was Joseph Kamara's tenure at the Anti-Corruption Boss. They set up integrity clubs at various schools, kind of like tackling corruption at that level. And I think it's a very good approach. You reward people. I think Jan Cole introduced the Integrity Award, which unfortunately is no longer happening. They would identify certain individuals in society and they would give them the Integrity Award on World Anti-Corruption Day to encourage others to not be corrupt. So I think that preventing corruption is the best option, but because it's going to be very difficult, it's going to take a lot of time, I would say pursue preventive mechanism, but also prosecute those whom you have evidence against, and just don't let anybody off the hook because of some consideration.
And what's your assessment to the role of the judiciary in all of this?
everybody has got a big role to play in the fight against corruption. From the parents who sends, their child to school and then they go ahead and give the teacher a bribe to not for them not to do so, to the journalists who must make sure that if somebody is involved in some skullduggery, they don't go ahead and accept money from them in exchange for writing favorably about someone whom their conscience tells them is corrupt. To the judiciary, to the magistrates and the judges, to understand that corruption is destroying this country and we need to put a stop to it. And at some point I was taking stock, but I lost track. I'm not sure what it was like in terms of figures, but sometimes when you had a foreign judge presiding over an anti-corruption case, chances were that convictions would be gained, as opposed to if you had a Sierra Leonean judge many years ago. I'm not sure what it is now because, like I say, we have not had so many prosecutions and all of that. But I think the judiciary has got a pivotal role to play in the fight against corruption. But if people feel that they can get off the hook, particularly at the appeals court level, it is somewhere where the media does not have its eyes on. Somebody comes and they are convicted at the High Court, and then they go to the appeals court. There is no media around that, as much as there was media attention around the High Court trial. And then whatever happens at the appeals court level, we don't know. They end up being, acquitted. And I think the judges have got to stand up to be counted and do what is in the best interest of this country.
Is the fight against corruption winnable? Do you think?
It can be won. But it's like you cannot be smoking cigarettes, or rather you cannot tell your children not to smoke cigarettes and you send them to go and buy you a cigarette. It makes no sense. They'll ask themselves, why is that he's smoking? He doesn't want us to smoke. It starts with the leadership. They've got to not just say it, they've got to live it and show it that they are not corrupt. And that sends a very powerful message in warding off anybody who wants to be corrupt.
Now, let's look at the ongoing hearings before the commissions of inquiry, investigating the stewardship of former officials of the then All People's Congress, like government, I would say. Now, how does the call to account factor into the country's democratic credentials?
It's not new, the issue of corrupt commissions of inquiry. We had, and people easily forget in Sierra Leone, we had, I think it was 3 commissions of inquiry against President Ernest Koroma when he won in 2007. Those wrongful things that were done then, that have the semblance of being repeated now, it's unfortunate. Namely, unnecessarily stopping former government officials from traveling. I think if there's a smoking gun against anybody, charge them, but don't just stop them from traveling. It happened in 2007, and the then Vice President Samuel Samsumana was in charge of implementing that policy of not allowing former government officials to travel. I'm sure a lot of Sudanese forgot about that completely. Now the same thing happened this time around. I thought that was really bad. It serves as a disincentive for people to want to serve governments if you just stop them from traveling without reason. Now, in terms of commission of inquiry, I think it's a way of giving accounts. And I think it is absolutely in place that Parliament discussed it and they voted on the instruments to set up these commissions of inquiry. What I will not talk about in terms of those commissions of inquiry is whether or not the rules of evidence is clear or unclear, and I will refrain myself from talking about that because it's before the Supreme Court. And it's something that it is something that I'll be reporting on as well. So I would not want to talk about, whether that was right or that was wrong. But in terms of the needfulness, to have accountability, whatever accountability mechanism is something which I welcome.
Now, the opposition All People's Congress had insisted they would not subject any of their members before the Commission of Inquiry, citing procedural defects. I know there are legal avenues, if such insistence were to hold. But in what sense does this defeat the effort to curb impunity?
Well, so far the commissions of inquiry, I think all commissions are still pressing on with their businesses. Yeah. And the matters before the Supreme Court in terms of the broader issue of dealing with the rules of evidence. And I remember attending a seat in one of the commissions of inquiry and somebody saying that the day the Supreme Court ruled that they were not operating within the law, he would pack his bags and leave Sierra Leone until that wrong was corrected. So I would leave that in terms of of that defense, and the APC have got all the right to challenge and go to the courts. I mean, it's just the rule of law. Now, in terms of the fact that the lawyers are appearing before the commissions of inquiry, whether that in itself defeats all the argument as to whether or not, this is what this is. I mean, that can be argued. Their lawyers are there, and I'm sure the lawyers exhaust their defense of their clients to not appear before the commissions of inquiry, they will eventually make a decision to let them appear before the commissions of inquiry. So, but as I say, it's a mechanism of accountability, and it is something which I think anybody who is called upon should cooperate with.
In case you're just joining us, you are watching Bottom Line, and I'm talking to print and broadcast journalist, BBC correspondent, and the CEO of the Free Media Group, Umaru Fofana. You can also join us by sending your text messages to 033 022 639, 033 022 639, and also join us on Facebook at SLBC TV channel 31. Now, let's see what some of our texters have been saying. This one here is, the two educated analysts I am learning. This is from Eddie Grant. SLBC Sierra Leone is watching. Wow, thanks to you, Joseph, for bringing one of my mentors and credible journalists, name of Umaru Fofana, on Bottom Line for political discussions, because they are the people who are neutral in terms of politics. And this is from Boss L.A. of Bozak. This is the man some set of people keep accusing of being an SLPP supporter. But listening to him, you clearly see that he is an independent-minded person. This is from Kaifala Kowa. Kowa, I see here. Umar Fofana is one of the journalists who is saying the truth about the country from Muhammad Sharif. For God's sake, this is not supposed to be politicized, which is greatly affecting women's community, especially the younger ones. Continue to send your text messages to the number 030-022-639, 030-022-639. The program is Bottom Line. Now, Umar, let's move on. You were saying, yes, lawyers representing the persons of interest at the ongoing commissions of inquiry, initially raised objection to the jurisdiction of the commissions to hold, but this was ruled against by the judges. And now they are before the court. I mean, the lawyers are actually now before the court, actually defending, their clients. Could this have been better handled, do you think, by the All People's Congress, who initially said they will not subject their members, before the commission?
I think it could have been better handled by the APC and by our judiciary, and I'm surprised that the Supreme Court has still not considered itself to look into this matter. All those weeks since there was a challenge to it, I think by the Bar Association, and then I think also by the APC, I'm not sure, but there was certainly a challenge. So if the Supreme Court had looked into this matter, I'm not sure what the challenges are, to be honest. So they've got to probably explain to the public as to why it's taking all this time for them to look into the matter. But if they had looked into it, if they had handled it faster, quicker than they have, probably this would have been averted. But invariably, the APC could have probably, pursued the two prongs by way of saying, we respect the commissions of inquiry, therefore we're coming before them, but we have serious concerns over their jurisdiction, for which we are seeking redress at the Supreme Courts. But the fact that the lawyers have not boycotted probably speaks to the other part of my point that they should.
They are not lawyers of the APC at this point.
They are lawyers of the individuals.
Yes.
Well, there's a very thin line.
Oh, yes,
let's be honest. There's a very thin line. So it tells us that indeed they are doing what they are doing. Somehow indirectly, these guys are appearing before these judges or these commissioners of the commissions of inquiry. So probably they're pursuing that option, and they're hoping that the Supreme Court will sit on this.
And it's only persons of interest we are invited in your individual capacity, not as a political party. Mm-hmm. Situate the relevance of the opposition's position not to subject their members before the commission.
If I was a politician with the opposition, politicians play the same trick to try to have their way. So I remember, I think it was in 2010 or so, when there was a London conference, on investment in Sierra Leone. And I was covering the conference in London. And the opposition leader here at the time, it was John Benjamin, held a press conference in which he appeared to be impugning the government. And there was a lot of outcry that he was doing it at the wrong time. And then I said, no, that is timing. Every opposition looks out for the perfect timing. You look for prime time. When there is attention on you, that's when you seek to score your political points. Albeit, you have got to have the country in mind. So what they are doing now is a political strategy. It's very easy to read through if you read through it very carefully. And it is something which I'm sure.
What are you reading?
Clearly, we want to make this commission of inquiry appear to be a witch hunt as best as possible. You know, I have what I call the mud mentality. You splatter mud on the wall in the hope that some will stick. So it takes the efficacy of the commissions of inquiry to prove themselves to be otherwise. And while that is happening, the Supreme Court should sit and look into this challenge or this petition or whatever it is that is before them. Because the longer that takes, the more all of this controversy drags on. And the more both sides decide to score political points. The commissions of inquiry can be said to be a way of holding the former leaders accountable, but it cannot shy away from the fact that it's also a way of scoring political points against those who are in power before now. Invariably, the APC's approach is also geared towards the same political point scoring. That's what they are all up to. That's what politicians all over the world. You follow the US election, the US governance system, that's what happens all over the world. So that's what their real eyes are on. So I would say, let the Supreme Court rule. Again, it comes to do with I respect the judiciary a lot, but sometimes they've prolonged certain things that have landed us in areas that could have easily avoided. You talk about even the SLFA matter. It's still before the courts. There's still been no conclusion to that, and which was likely why we were suspended, and which is why we still remain suspended. So probably if they quicken things up, we can avoid some of those things, and justice will not only be done, but to be done speedily.
Now, what have you drawn from the testimonies of the witnesses without attempting to prejudice the recommendations of the commissions of inquiry? Now, we're not actually seeing the persons of interest, as it were. We're seeing the lawyers, and we're seeing witnesses coming forward. These witnesses are being cross-examined by the lawyers representing the persons of interest and the like. From what they are saying, and you've been a journalist, you're covering some of these proceedings in court. What are you able to draw so far, if at all?
I've got to admit that I've not paid keen attention to the day-to-day events before the commissions, but what I've followed things that have happened, I've only brought to light two things. One, they have underscored the APC's points that civil servants were also involved and therefore they should be roped in. But they've also underscored the government's points that if any civil servant is named, they will be called upon. So both sides have had their takes probably buttressed. And I think that is something which should be a reason for us to really make sure that we address corruption and we have a root and branch approach to dealing with corruption at the civil service and at the public service. Sometimes in Sierra Leone there's a very thin line between the public service and the civil service, and I think we have to have that dichotomy for the best interest of governance in our country.
As anti-corruption crusader, if you like, what outcome do you expect from these proceedings?
I expect justice to be done, and that justice means absolving the innocent and roping in the guilty.
Now, let's move over to sport, football in particular. The local league, or the local Premier League, if you like, is back after nearly 4 years. We saw the euphoria at the opening ceremony. Even His Excellency the President was there and some other government officials. This comes as the country remains suspended by FIFA, the world governing body. But Sierra Leoneans appear determined. What message does this send?
When I was a little boy, I used to buy a lot of cassette tapes, even though I didn't have a cassette tape player myself. So when I went to areas, I would sit down, listen to music. If their music was not exciting, I'd give them a cassette tape, and they would play it, and they would all enjoy it. And eventually, when I was able to buy a cassette tape recorder, I had a lot of cassette tapes already to play. So you don't wait until the suspension is lifted before you resume playing football. Otherwise, you're going to be caught off guard. So it's a very good thing that the government chose to have football back in the country even before FIFA lifts the suspension. I have never seen anything like this, and I've been a passionate football fan virtually all my life. There were times when we'd literally count ourselves at the stadium watching the local, league. But nowadays, virtually every game is a big. You see huge crowds turning out. I've watched matches in Connaught, I've watched them in Bow, in Freetown, Parade, at the stadium. It's amazing. It tells you the passion that people have for football. And one dividend that it has brought about, which probably we have not easily noticed, is that tension has simmered down somewhat since this league started. Young men mostly, but also some young men troop into the stadium around the country to watch football, and then it kind of like gives them something else to do other than sitting and tickle tackling or quarreling and all of that. So that's one possible benefit to have derived from this. And the fact that it's given chance once again to young people who would have otherwise had their future blighted, their football talent, if football had not resumed. So now they've resumed, and there are scouts around looking around for budding talent to sign up for teams abroad, to give them more money and give them more exposure. So it's a fantastic thing, and I'm really very impressed. However, it should be a real concern to all of us that we should use that as an opportunity to fix the broken systems in our football. I went to the approved school. That football field is terrible, and I'm told it's better than even the Parade field and the Atuga Stadium field.
We'll come to the challenges in all of this. I think there's a board. Maybe you can profile some of the solutions, after the challenges that you've observed. But I was talking about, the love for football by Sierra Leoneans generally, or football-loving fans, if you like. I'm talking about the massive support. Is this likely, to trigger a reversal,
Our football fortunes, you mean?
No, I mean in terms of FIFA reversing this decision.
No, they don't look up to this. They know this country loves football religiously. That's something which they know. And FIFA is an obstinate organization. If they say you have to do it this way, you'd better do it that way. Now, from my discussions with the vice president of Sierra Leone, who went to Zurich to meet with the FIFA leadership, he said to me that FIFA had said to him that if the matter in court was concluded, regardless of which way it went, they would lift the suspension, which is why I mentioned the issue of the matter still not being concluded in court. I'm not sure what the challenges are, but I think the earlier that was concluded, the better it would be for football in the country. But people just said, FIFA, go to hell. We love our football, and we like things the way they are. Whether or not we're going to be able to play continental, we couldn't care less. So let's just go on with our football.
And the league itself started very well, but there are a few challenges. You are just mentioning a few. The Diamond Stars, I understand your club.
I know where you're coming from.
Against my club, if you like, the Kano Eagles of Kenema. And their opening match in Kenema was terrible, if you like. I think the referee was even hit on the head. The match was stopped for a while. How do you think the board should address indiscipline? Because this is just starting after 4 years. I'm beginning to see even referees suspended by the board itself, for indiscipline and the like cause for some concern. How do we get the board, the Premier League board, to address some of these challenges?
First of all, let us not leave out the good things about the way the fans have behaved. I have been particularly impressed by the way those tens of thousands of supporters have thronged the National Stadium and gone back home peacefully.
They one day descend on the
fact that so far they are well behaved is something which we've got to give to them. And I'm going to give them thumbs up for being so well behaved. In those huge numbers, they go to the stadium, they leave quietly, they argue, some of them are really angry. I remember when Blackpool got beaten, some Blackpool guys were really very raving mad, but they behaved themselves and they left the stadium and went back home. You've got to give that to them. Unfortunately, there have been those incidents, those very unfortunate incidents in Kenema, and another one, I think even in Connaught. You're quite right, I support the Diamond Stars. We're doing very badly right now. Hopefully we'll change our fortune very soon. That is reprehensible. It is really utterly wrong. And that is somewhere where I would expect the leaders of these clubs to come out and denounce the behavior or the misbehavior of their supporters. Because they are your supporters does not mean you cannot denounce them when they behave untoward. So I think it was wrong that Diamond Stars supporters, did that pitch invasion. Although somebody said to me, pitch invasion is a part of the game in the provinces. There is no perimeter fence. When people score football, we invade the pitch. Sometimes we do it happily. Unfortunately, sometimes we do it not so happily. But I think there's got to be discipline in that regard. And the Premier League board, they've gotten off on a very good footing. But I also believe that they have to allow institutions to do their job. I understand, I've not spoken to the PLB, but I understand that those actions that we are taking against these clubs and referees were not taken on the recommendation of the disciplinary committee, which it is that should proffer such recommendations. So if those recommendations were taken just by the PLB itself, then that is something which can be challenged because it did not go through the normal process, which should have been the disciplinary committee meeting and suggesting to the Premier League board on actions to be taken.
Talk to me about the parade field you're talking about in terms of the nature of the field itself, and how the players see themselves, on the pitch.
It's a very bad. It's a dirt, it's a dirt field basically where you would not expect, professional league to be played on. To be honest, it's dangerous. Amanki, one of the Diamond Stars attackers, there was a collision between himself and the Port Authority player that left him unconscious because he fell on the pitch. And I think we need to really up the game and the facilities. That pitch is really terrible, and like I said earlier, I'm told that it's even better, bad as it may be, it's better than the parade field. I'm told it's also better than the Atuga field, which are also hosting some of the matches. I went into the dressing room. The dressing room is so appalling. It's so hot because it's tarpaulined, and this guy's sitting on the floor there with no ventilation. It's just bad.
Maybe we're only coming up after 4 years.
No, those things had always been like that before. Our league was even suspended. I don't know why they're not using the Kingdom Academy field. I don't know, but I think that could be an alternative venue. As opposed to allowing those guys to play football.
Now, from the look of things, which team would you place your bet on to win the league? Certainly not Diamond Stars.
We are the defending champions, so never say that. It's just
a
few matches, man.
We're talking about this.
It's just a few matches. To be honest, it's going to be a tough race, but I think one football club that has carved a niche for itself, and I think I was discussing with my colleague that they've now taken the third place in terms of popularity, and that is FC Cologne. I think FC Cologne has taken over the Port Authority to occupy the third most popular club in Sierra Leone. It's not scientific. Anecdotally, I think, they are the third most popular club in the country now, certainly in Freetown, and they are playing super football. I suspect the reason for them right now playing the way they are is because when the league was not on, they were still playing football of some sort because it's owned by an a former Sierra Leone international who somehow found a way of keeping them playing football. Anti-drugs, they've also got a good team, and Central Parade. Forget about all this talk about Lions and Blackpool, man.
Which team?
It's hard to say, but I think my bet would be, it could either be FC Cologne, Central Parade, maybe Lions or Lions.
Or Cambo Eagles. Now, just before we go, what does this job, journalism, mean to and for you? Because more often than not, we're seeing, mudslinging here and there. You just saw from one of the texters saying at some point you're accused of being SLPP, and at some point but he's so much impressed by the way you try to articulate things. And I've also read some of the posts, your post on Facebook. You would appear able to, to have some of these posts to the effect that people are merely accusing you and this, and you've gone through this over the years. What does it mean for you?
It's the nature of the game. If you're a Christian, the person you hold at the highest esteem has to be Jesus Christ. He was derided by some people. If you're a Muslim, that person has got to be Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He was also derided by certain people. How much less a mere sinner like Umar Fofana. But I take it in my stride because I believe that people have to have the right to criticize you. And if you, I'm addicted to Twitter. I've got the biggest Twitter following of any individual, you know, living in Sierra Leone, probably living in Guinea and in Liberia, within this basin. You know, so I follow Twitter a lot, and I know the kind of derision that President Trump encounters. But it carries on. One of the biggest characteristics of a good leader is your ability to put up with criticism. You know, absorb it and move on. That's the life I've been living for many years.
I'm afraid I have to stop you there. Thank you very much, Maru. Just before we go, let's see what messages we have here. Good talk, Mr. Fofana. This is from Kadik Mara. Good point, sir. All them on a bad people them because they not dance to on a tune. Agnes Bindu Kombu. Umaru, most journalists who are supposed to report on issues in court extract money from the accused instead of investigating to bring out the fact. Those MPs who are against the president's pronouncement is a shame. I pray they feel what other people feel with their children. I don't seem to get this quite. But then today is my first day to see Umaru Fofana clearly. What a handsome man. Very eloquent and honest. You should be smiling.
I am smiling.
Very eloquent and honest on his seat. He made my evening tonight by giving me the correct lesson about politics and political climate in Sierra Leone today. This is from, surprisingly, Laske, I see here, Laske. Well, viewers, that's all what we have time for in this edition of Bottom Line. If you missed part or all of this edition, we are back on Thursday at 1 p.m. with another edition of the program Bottom Line. My guest has been Umaru Fofana, BBC correspondent in Sierra Leone. He's also the CEO of a free media group, broadcast journalist, if you like print journalism as well. He has been my guest tonight, and we are back next Tuesday with another edition of Bottom Line. The producer of this program has been Tilly Kuma. With many thanks to the technical crew. Goodbye.
Benda Kapua seeks the perspective of former president of journalists, current BBC correspondent and grounded expert on socio-political events, Umaru Fofana, who will offer you an amazing cocktail of